Hello, and welcome to the GW Book Club, where we take a look at Warhammer fiction back from the very original books published by GW Books through Black Library and lots of other sources as well. Today, we are taking a look at a short story that is all about Cathay that was released for Total War Warhammer 3. Stu, how are you doing in the run-up to the release of Cathay?
Really excited at the moment, and this helps or doesn't help. I'm not quite sure the way it works, but when we found it existed, it was like this is perfect. This is perfect. We wanted to do something that was kind of on topic. Didn't think there was any fiction, and then suddenly just came up. I was searching Reddit for something, probably thinking of paint schemes in the future. And I was like, "This book exists. This story exists. Let's do this. Let's do it."
Yeah, it was
It's
a
a really
great
short one,
find.
but
You've done well. You've done well because this is Master of the Meteor Wind. It is written by David Guymer, who's written loads of Black Library fiction, like 25 novels, I think, for the Black Library, and loads of short stories and lots of other stuff as well. But it's released as part of the sort of Creative Assembly Total War Warhammer fiction series, right? But it's
mm,
about Cathay.
yes, yeah. It's I didn't know it existed,
Me neither, no.
and it's quite hard to find. Um, I think it was something that maybe it was given away with certain editions of the game. It
Hmm.
feels like that. And I've got a very nice digital edition with full color pictures and things, and it took quite a while to find it because I was trying to buy the actual book, and I don't know if it actually existed. It was a real head scratcher, and it's lots on YouTube as well. Quite a few people have recorded it as an audiobook, and there was an official audiobook recorded and put
Yeah.
on the Total War, which is really well done. So I've read this and I've listened to this a few times as well, and yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by the quality of it.
They've done a
Spoilers,
great job,
and the
right?
quality of the presentation of the actual book
Yeah.
and the audiobook as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's because it's only about I think it's like 20, 25
20
pages, something
pages,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah, it's quite short. The audiobook, which I'll put a link to down below, is like an hour long, but it's professionally
Mm,
read. It's very well put together, I think.
mm,
But yeah, I mean, I guess we should get into the story itself. So this is Yan Bao, who is one of the celestial dragons, one of the royalty of Cathay and the empire of Cathay, sitting down to tea. There's like a tea ceremony, quite ritualistic, with his sister Miao Ying,
mm.
and they are. There's a bit of tension, right? And there's clearly something like a difficulty in the family between the two of them, but they're both very powerful. They are both dragons who can take human form, and they are having this conversation with lots of sort of subtext, I would say. And that's kind of
Yes.
that's the framing of the whole story, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So these are celestial dragons. Miao Ying is the storm dragon, the mistress of the north, so the way your bastion wall is. And funnily enough, the leading character for the up and coming Games Workshop
Sure.
release as well, the miniature
Mm.
we've seen released. And Yang Bao is the jade dragon, so another one of the jade dragon. I think he's described as the administrator of the celestial court, which is
Yeah,
the
because
same
he's
quote
the
as it's the same
yeah.
quote as Flash.
Sure, but he's like I think he's older, right? He's
Yeah.
like has a position of seniority in the sort of royal
Mhm.
family, and he is the administrator for the court. So he kind of has this sort of is a superior rank, but all of the
Yes.
different regions of Cathay are commanded by the different sort of members of the royal family. So the siblings, who are all these
Yes.
dragons descended from the Dragon Emperor and the Moon Empress, and they have so it is a it's as a dynasty, I suppose.
Hmm. Yes.
And but it's a benevolent dynasty, I think, is the sense that we're supposed to get, right? That they do care about their people and they care about their empire and sort of keeping it strong. That Bastion Wall that you mentioned is, a sort of fantasy version of the Great Wall of China that separates them from the north and prevents all of the Kurgan and the marauders from the Chaos Wastes entering the
Hmm.
empire. So you get all of this kind of good stuff and all that backdrop. But the sort of main thrust of this particular story, because it is so brief, is essentially
Mm.
establishing these two characters and a bit of the dynamics between these two characters, the two different dragons. At the same time, there is a Tzeentchian army sort of marching on the city and putting pressure on them. And then there's also these Onyx Crowmen who are
Hmm.
these strange sort of almost like ninja kind of characters. They move at night, but they're not human. They're actually sort of animated statues in the form of
Yes.
crow people, right? And they're out there,
Hmm.
they're basically hunting sorcerers, I suppose.
Yeah, they seem to be some kind of secret agent, stroke assassin, stroke do the dirty jobs for the Cathay dragons and the
Mm.
regime, so to speak, which is quite interesting. I know that I think they're in the game. There's definitely the computer game, or we don't
Sure,
know
in
whether
the
they're
Total
coming
War, yeah.
for the old world. I think they're on some of the artwork. If you look really, really closely, but some of the artwork we've seen for Total War 3 as
Mm.
well. So you don't know how much goes the other way, but they're really interesting. Looking forward to finding out a bit more about them. You don't find out loads in this story, but just enough
No.
to give them that mysterious feel, and know that they're powerful and they're strong and they're
Because they're quite sinister,
they
aren't they, as well? There's a
yeah.
feel that are they the good guys? Like if you're coming to this cold and you haven't seen any of the lore and haven't played any of Total War, there's a feel of like maybe these are a set of, maybe they're working with Tzeentch. Maybe these are bad guys who are sort of descending on the city as well.
It does give you the idea that they could be. I don't
Hmm.
think that's what it is, but I genuinely don't know. There'll be people who
I
know a
don't
lot
think they
more
are, but I think
about the
there's
law.
that sense,
Hmm.
because they do. They're almost like they are used, like you say, for the dirty jobs, and they're
Yeah.
dispatched. I'm not sure who they work for. I think there's a specific character, one of the royal family that they work for. But
Yes.
here, they're kind of under cover of night. They're hunting something that it's not quite clear what their purpose is. I mean, it becomes clear later on, but initially,
Hmm.
they are just this unusual part man, part crow kind of thing. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. And if you're new to the story, and I've been doing a little bit of research around the Cathay for my own channel for obvious reasons with a big release coming up. So before that, though, I wouldn't have had a clue who these are, and I can see that from the story's perspective. Yes, they do. Are the which side are these on in this story?
mm,
I tell you, I mean, this is sort of jumping ahead in some ways, but what really stands out to me about this whole style of the writing here, and also the delivery with the audiobook and much of the story, it makes me think Horus Heresy for a
right,
number of reasons. There's a little bit of that going on there with Cathay anyway. So you've got the dragon, the emperor, and his semi celestial children, these all
sure,
powerful demigods, or gods, I suppose, in some ways. The dragons, which is very Primarch esque.
sure,
And again, they know they're benevolent, and they know the best for their people, but are they arrogant with it? And then you can see lots of parallels to that in this story anyway. And these crows, are they assassins or something like that, or
mm,
do they work for a certain faction of the administratum? Are they custodies? You can see these kind of connections where they fall into a similar kind of character type,
sure,
that they're powerful but they're sinister and they're scary at the same time. There's a lot about the way that the novel's written as well. So you've got this lovely conversation going on, and I think it's so well described. It really
mm,
builds up this peaceful tension, if that makes any sense. It feels very serene because of the tea drinking and the way it's described, all of that in great detail, the process of making the tea and what's right and all the actions and movements. But then the actual conversation has got that kind of undertone to it, and it
yeah,
really plays off nicely. But again, it reminds me a lot of the dialogue that I've read a lot of the Horus Heresy novels. You're yet to, but will be soon. And it feels like that style of writing, which is different to a lot of Warhammer fantasy fiction that we've covered. It's completely different in its style. It's more modern, and it feels like that kind of writing. And I think David Guymer's grown up as a writer and written more since those original books. So he may really have grown up reading Abnett and
sure.
things like that. But it feels like the vibe, if probably not the best word, but the vibe of some of those heresy novels, but through a Warhammer setting, which I really enjoyed actually. I'm not a huge fan of short stories.
Right.
I tend to feel pretty unfulfilled by them a lot of the time, especially ones that are this short. They're either a little bit too, well, let's do all the violence for 20 pages, which never works for me, or they don't seem to get anywhere, and you want it to. And then the really, really good ones seem to have a lot going on. I think there's so much told in such a
Yeah.
short period in this. I mean, there's like 3 or 4 different scene changes, which you wouldn't always see, and I think it just gives you a really good snapshot of something quite big and momentous that's going on.
Yeah, I agree actually. I think it's very tough to introduce. I know obviously they're introducing or they were introducing Cathay in the game itself, but in terms of fiction, this is one of the few
Mm.
examples of Cathay sort of having a story about it and with characters in Cathay. Across like even the Black Library's output. There's a couple of examples, and we maybe touch on them in a minute from the GW books range. But really, this is it. This is like the story, the only story in Cathay
Yeah,
that you can read. So there is a bit of weight to, a bit of expectation of, okay, well, you've got to introduce like what are the dynamics like between royalty when they're talking to one another?
mm.
What's the dynamics of a tea ceremony? What is it like just existing in this space even before there are Onyx crowmen flying about and Tzeentchian armies on the warpath? You've got to establish a lot of that sort of stuff to give us some like roots, a foundation for what it's like to exist in this space
Mm.
before the war comes. And I think it's very successful at that. Obviously, it borrows or is inspired a lot by traditional, actual, real world history, and there's a lot of cultural elements. The tea ceremony itself from a lot
Hmm.
of Eastern cultures is incredibly important. There is a lot of ritual to it. There's a lot of specific movements and steps that are required in order to create that tea, as well as the way in which polite society interacts. There's a lot of rules and regulations and sort of expectations there. So all of that sort of stuff is well deployed here and gives you an interesting sort of insight into the culture of Cathay.
Yeah.
But it's also subverted, I think, a little bit because you do have the ticking clock. So, like you say, you're basically you're putting this really serene, slow, deliberate scene against, okay, there's an army marching in. There's
Yeah.
weird assassin guys running around. So you've got these kind of very time sensitive with this very slow, steeping of the tea that sort of ratchets up a bit of tension. And then you've also got the actual reveal later on that this is not Miao Ying actually. This is an agent of
Yes.
Tzeentch who is
Yes.
masquerading as Miao Ying. And then all of a sudden you do have an action scene and it sort of explodes. The tension that's
Hmm.
been there between siblings becomes an enemies thing. And I thought that was quite well executed as a sort of turn.
Yes. Yeah, you can see it building.
Mm.
And it makes sense of the other scenes that are going on at the time, the why the crowmen are doing what they're doing,
Yeah.
because this is suspected at least by Yangbo, the Jade Dragon. He knows something's not right. She's not protecting her province. She's not defending the way she should do. This
Mm.
invasion is not asking for help. So he's kind of arrived with his own armies for help, and you're seeing that grow as part of the conversation. But the kind of the reveal is, yeah, well, he's there for the right reasons, and then this is why the actions are happening with the crow, and why one of the gate masters is also in trouble for not defending properly. So you see the kind of a little bit of the military side of it as well. So these
Mm.
different scenes. So it brings it together very, very nicely.
Yeah.
It builds up to that nice crescendo at the end, but it's not too crazy either. And then the very end is almost quite subtle and dies away. But I just think it was very, very well done.
What did you think of the sort of way in which Yan Bao actually worked out that it wasn't Miao Ying? Because he said he basically reveals that it's because of how he tapped the table in thanks,
Mm.
and that was the sort of thing that he understood. Okay, well, he's done it in an impolite way, the way he said thanks
Hmm.
by tapping the table, and Miao Ying never would have accepted that. So he's sort of
Yes.
revealed it, and it reminds me of the film Inglorious Bastards, where there's an undercover operative. I mean, spoilers for a movie, but there's an undercover operative who is revealed because of how he gestures and basically says the number 3 using his fingers. So because of
Yes.
that, he then is uncovered and the real identity is revealed. So it was very similar to that, and it allows you to have this tense moment that then
Mm.
is revealed on like quite a clever observation. I think it's
Yeah.
really, I think it's conceptually great. In terms
Yes.
of the execution, it's a little bit difficult because these are cultural norms that I, as a reader, do not know, and
Yes.
it's not visual. So he's having to
Hmm.
explain. So it's maybe a little bit wordy in how it is.
Okay.
It's like how did you know I was not really meowing? And then he has to go. Oh well, it was because I did this tap and this means this, and then I did this other tap and that means that.
That's
So
interesting.
it was a little bit. I don't want to say clumsy, but that was probably the sort of naughtiest little bit of exposition
Okay.
that stumbled for me a little bit. But the actual idea of it, I think, is great.
Hmm. It worked for me,
Mm,
actually. That's why I was quite surprised when you were saying that. Because I felt that because it was a subtle thing, and there was a story that linked to that lovely mini world building, and talking about the ceremony and how descriptive it all was, and that slow pace that it gave in what is a short story, so sometimes they're so often quick. It I liked that subtlety,
mm,
and it didn't feel like it was explained in a way that felt odd to me. It just seemed to make sense, because by explaining why he knew, he was explaining to this agent of
sure.
Tzeentch, and this is how I've caught you, rather than explaining to the reader, and that's how we found out as a reader. So for me, it worked. But I will reread that bit again and see
Oh,
if I can
it's probably
capture
just
what you
me
did.
getting.
No,
I'm
no,
just getting
it's
caught up in it, I
interesting. It
think.
is interesting, because I thought it was. I really liked the fact that it wasn't just some kind of Deus Ex Machina kind of, oh well, I know because da 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 da, or someone
Sure, yeah.
saw a
I
message
never
or
said
something.
X and Y or
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah,
exactly. I like the fact that it was really subtle and clever, because it matched that whole
it
vibe of
does. Yeah, it does. Conceptually,
the
it does.
conversation. These are clearly very powerful people. Even the Agent of Chaos is clearly very powerful.
Yes.
And again, it's probably some of that Horus Heresy stuff, but it just reminds me of conversations, important conversations that you have between the Primarchs at certain stages throughout that series. It just
I mean,
really
that's
took me right back to that.
a really interesting suggestion. And I know you're saying it reminds you of Horus Heresy, but like
Hmm.
you're right in that you have this immortal dynasty
Hmm.
in obviously there's huge amount of politics, there's lots of different enemies, there's a big story you could tell. And absolutely there's scope to do 1,000-year history of like series of novels for the old world just about Cathay and the Imperial family. That could be really cool.
Well, maybe that's why they weren't in the end times, because they went off,
Sure.
and one of them went off and became the emperor of mankind, and started a whole new dynasty.
Well, I mean, this is some real, yeah, tinfoil
And they
hat
don't like the
theory
old ones.
crafting.
They were a little bit annoyed with the way the old ones left the old world, and there's a connection in the future with the old ones in the 31st millennium, and the Emperor of Mankind, and all of that kind of. There's some lovely connections there. So maybe they went on to get their revenge in another universe.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not, yeah. I mean, it's certainly possible. The thing, the other, I will, one other tiny bit of criticism I will say, and I think this is unfortunate, but it's like how many times Onyx Crowman or Onyx
Hmm.
Crowman has to be said in like one paragraph. There's a lot. There's the same
Yes.
term,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's
I'm with
an
you on that
awkward
one.
one because you're trying to establish, okay, this is a thing, and I'm talking about this thing, and you can't really use any synonyms for it because then
Yep.
because this is the first time we're encountering it largely. So if you then go, oh, and actually the bird boys, like, well, is that their official name? Like you sort of, it's a difficult kind of spot. So I have sympathy, but it did just, I thought it was very funny listening to the audiobook, hearing him say Onyx Crowman about 6 times in a row.
It was a little bit
Yeah,
clunky,
it
that.
was
Oh,
funny to me.
no, I agree. They needed, I suppose, I don't know enough about them, but I'm guessing they don't have a name. And at that point, that character needed a characterful name,
Yeah.
so that you didn't have to repeat that. But you were right; it maybe not an easy way of doing it, but it was a little
Yeah.
bit kind of
Well, you said that
repetitive.
you're sometimes not satisfied with short stories. Was this satisfying
Yeah,
after all, do you think?
yeah. This was good. This is a good short story,
Mm,
because I often feel there's just nothing to talk about. It's delivered an action scene
mm,
or something that doesn't this is a perfect kind of beginning to a bigger story, and I think
sure.
that's where short stories can be really good, or they can be a sort of subplot of a wider story, a conversation, maybe a big epic story and you know something happened, and a short story just tells a little bit more detail one given point or moment. That's good as well, because it kind of links in with a wider narrative, and this feels like it links in with a wider narrative rather
Yeah.
than just being a bit of a short wham bam thank you ma'am kind of thing, which is fine. But this feels like literature rather than fan fiction, if that makes
Mm,
sense. And some
sure.
some short stories can be a little bit, especially for game licenses, can feel a little bit like they're written for the sake of it. And I'm sure this would have been commissioned to promote and to market the game.
Yeah.
But I think David Guymer's done a really, really good job, and I get the impression he enjoyed it, because
Mm.
for me, it comes across in the words that he enjoyed dipping in and exploring. We'd be really interested to ask him, if we ever got the opportunity, did you want to go on and write more after that? Because there's
It
so many
would.
stories that could be told.
Yeah, and clearly there's a lot of research been done, I think. Like, and
Mm.
we've seen Warhammer community articles talking about Cathay and its development, and the use of sensitivity readers and cultural stuff like that. It feels like in
Mm.
this story, and this came out a while ago, like that same kind of consideration had been given. Like, how do we represent this? How do we find influence and inspiration in a sensitive way and bring it to life in the Warhammer world? And I think that that's
Yeah.
definitely achieved here. I mean, just
Yes.
whilst we're here, let's just very briefly revisit some other Cathayan fiction that we have seen, and we've actually covered it in detail, so people can go and get the full stories if they want. But Jack Yeovil touched on Cathay in his GW books. So in Red
Yes.
Thirst, the short story, we actually get introduced to a Cathayan character, and also a version of Tzeentch that's kind of worshipped there. And then in Beasts in
Hmm.
Velvet, we see that same character again, now masquerading as the ambassador from Cathay. And there's like just there is a glimpse of a Cathay that almost never was, right, in those stories. Uh, Looking back now, does it change your view of those Jack Yeovil stories, or are they just this pocket thing that can kind of exist over there? And
Yeah, I'd never really have too much of an issue with those
Mm,
kind of things, because it was vague enough as well, wasn't it? And in both instances, that character wasn't really in Cathay at that point. It was
sure.
easier to have a single character where there's an influence, but you're not really exploring a whole race. You're not exploring a whole world, a whole universe, so one person representing doesn't cause an issue. Now, if those stories were set there and it was wildly different to what's being portrayed here, then maybe I would have felt, okay, which one is the real,
Mm,
which one's the real Cathay? Would it please stand up? But very easy for me to see both of those existing at the same time. In fact,
yeah,
it's very, especially with the Tzeentch worshipping, you can see quite
yeah,
clearly how both things could have been true. There's definitely going to be ambassadors, there's going to be traders, there's all kinds of back history to do with Cathay that's been fluffed out already. So there's loads of YouTube videos of people doing lore videos and things as well for it. There's a lot out there.
yeah.
How much of it's come from the game or not, I'm not sure. And I'm looking forward to finding out
Mm.
what the Old World team have done with the way it's expanding in that different time zone as well. But all the stuff we've covered before is completely believable. You'd expect there'd be some
Yeah.
limited sort of connections with Cathay, but it's mainly distant trade, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think you can square it as well because I think it's Dian Ching is the character,
Mm,
and he
yeah.
is a he's a Tzeentchian chaos cultist who maybe is quite far gone. So he sort of
Hmm.
becomes an unreliable narrator, and maybe the things he's talking about aren't quite exactly as as he has remembered them. So yeah, I think you can definitely, you can find the middle ground, and those stories can still be relevant to what we've got. One thing I did find quite interesting, and I'd be really curious, and I'm sort of doing research on Cathay at the moment, but there is a change in Tzeentch's name in Cathay.
Hmm.
So in the
Yes.
Yeovil stories, he's referred to as Cien Sin, and then that is
Hmm.
changed now to Chian Chi. And
Yes.
I was curious. I wonder, and maybe I'll be able to find that point of change. But I just wonder, like, why that was, because obviously
Hmm.
it's really nice in that they both sound like Tzeentch, right? They've sort of
Yeah.
managed to find a sort of the Cathayan pronunciation that to sound similar, which is a very nice idea. That they and I love that idea just generally of chaos gods being referred to differently and people thinking they're worshipping someone else, but actually it's just the same chaos god. I like that
Yes.
idea.
Especially when it's Tzeentch, it works
It's perfect
even
for
more.
Tzeentch. Yeah, it's great.
So and that's the easiest part. I imagine the honest answer is that whoever came up with the new name, the current name, or at least the name at this point, don't know if it's changed again for Old World, um, didn't find that reference
Maybe.
from River.
Yeah,
As
maybe.
simple as that. It could be that. There may be a translation of the original name that is
Sure.
problematic, or
Yeah, possible.
or just didn't work as well. So they said, "Hang on, let's change that." Especially when they talk about all the sort of cultural sensitivity and the people looking over the work. I can't imagine they did that for Redfest. It was a different time,
Sure.
and it wasn't. I'm not saying it means anything bad. I have no idea what it means, but
Sure,
you
yeah.
imagine it. Just you imagine that if it was a made up phrase and it could mean, just even if it's something silly, might just mean taxi banana or something like that. This is silly, we can't do that. So it could be something like that as well. They
Yeah.
just decided to change it because a translation of the old version was too close to something real world, maybe.
Certainly possible,
People
isn't
are
it?
now sitting there whacking the spellings into Google Translate to see if it turns into anything. And maybe we should do that.
Yeah.
If this section gets edited out, we'll know that it was something bad.
But yeah, I mean, so for me, I thought this was a really fun short story. I
Mm,
think it does a great job. It is both an interesting story in and of itself, but it also does a good job of just giving a flavor of Cathay and this new version or this fleshed out version of Cathay that sort of hadn't seen before. Obviously, now there's loads of
mm.
Cathay stuff around. The Total War 3 released and you can play them and you can see everything. They're coming out for the old world and you can see all the miniatures now and everything. So we're in a very different place to where we were a couple of years ago. But I think that this story does a really good job of just saying, okay, here is a way into this new like nation in the old world, in the Warhammer world.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's exciting times, and this, yeah, it didn't matter that this short story, and I encourage people to go and find it and read it because it doesn't matter the time period. If you're
Mm,
excited about Cathay, it gives you enough of an idea. These dragons still exist in the old world period. They've been around for forever,
yeah,
and as we know in Warhammer, things don't really progress and change an awful lot. So things were going to be the same. So this whole story could work as an old world story. There's nothing really
yeah.
that's told in this story alone that wouldn't work at all. So go out and read it for sure.
Does it make you want to play Total War Warhammer 3?
I've never played it, and the reason I haven't played it is I have a Mac. So,
Sure, me too.
because yeah, and which is probably saves me because a lot more miniatures have been painted because of it. And if I wasn't a Mac user, I would have definitely purchased it on Steam by now. That's for sure.
I mean, I will admit, after reading this, I did go and have a little look, and I was like, "Oh, what would it take? What system would I need?" Uh,
Yeah, you can't
but
play it on a Steam Deck either, which I did look into.
so I mean, it's
It's
done
not
its
designed. I
job in
don't
that
think it can work
sense.
on
It's
that.
got us excited about it, and yeah, I'm very much
Mm.
looking forward to Cathay's release for the old world, and I'm sure we'll be talking again at some point about that. And I think we're both going to have plenty of content
Hopefully, a
as and
new
when it comes
novel.
out. I mean, that would be
Hopefully, Black
something, wouldn't
Library are
it?
listening. If you're going to do a new novel, surely Cathay's
It
the time
feels
to do
like,
it.
right? There's a lot of opportunity there. I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of think now not though. I don't know. Based on the Amazon doing their usual and
Mm,
announcing releases ahead of time, and we know that we've got reprints of Sigmar trilogy and things
sure.
coming later in the year. something tells me, or the fear in my heart that said we would have had a date for a Cathay novel if one was about to be released, just like we did for Lords of the Lance. That was kind of
Sure.
announced a little bit ahead of time, and because that's all been silent, they've either been really good at keeping that under wraps, or it's not coming, and I'm
Yeah, fair
fearing that
point.
it's not coming
Yeah, but who knows where these things
yet.
go next year or
Yet.
in a couple of years. But because I agree, I think there's fertile ground there to explore. I think a lot of people would love to spend more time in Cathay. I'm looking forward to reading the Arcane Journal, but obviously that's a relatively small page count. There's a huge
Mm.
opportunity you would have thought to just go, okay, let's tell some stories, create some new characters who can explore this world, whether that is someone arriving for the first time in Cathay or people who live there and know it, there's a real opportunity to do some cool stuff, I think. So yeah,
Yeah.
who knows? But I would definitely I would be up for it. I'd love to see it.
Mm. Hope so.
Yeah. So let's end, Stu, with our rating system. Is this short story? Is it a thumbs up or a thumbs down for you?
Big thumbs up.
Big thumbs up. Me
Really
too.
enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was good. So, well, I mean, a very successful little read there. Then, where until we get together next time on the GW Book Club, where can people find you online, Stu?
Miniature Realms, YouTube first, and then pretty much every social media going apart from TikTok. I'm too old for TikTok. I don't make that work very well.
All right. Well, I will put the links in the descriptions below for all of those, and also my links as well. I'm Jordan Sorcery everywhere, including on YouTube and Blue Sky. But until next time, folks, thank you very much for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.